Princess Liara stood at the balcony of her palace, gazing out over the bustling city of Voltoria. The vast city stretched below her, a shimmering web of towering spires and intricate streets, each one alive with activity. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow on the stone walls of the kingdom. The people below seemed to go about their business, unaware of the vast galactic forces that constantly surrounded them. Liara often found herself lost in thought, wondering about the world beyond her kingdom. She had grown up in luxury, the daughter of King Zorath, the ruler of Voltoria. The king was a figure of power and wisdom, revered across the galaxy for his leadership and political acumen. Under his rule, Voltoria had remained prosperous and peaceful, with its position as a central power in the galaxy unchallenged for centuries. Liara, as the princess, had been groomed for a similar role. But unlike her father, who was content with the status quo, Liara harbored a sense of curiosity that couldn't be satisfied by the walls of her royal chambers. The royal court was a place of opulence and tradition, but to Liara, it was suffocating. She had always felt out of place among the courtiers, who spent their days speaking in hushed tones, exchanging endless formalities. Despite her beauty and intelligence, she often felt like a pawn in a game she didn't understand. There were always discussions about alliances, treaties, and power, and Liara could not help but feel that her future had been mapped out for her without her consent. Her father had arranged a marriage for her with Prince Ilan of Zorathia, a neighboring planet whose military power was unmatched. It was a strategic alliance meant to ensure peace and stability in the galaxy, but for Liara, it felt more like a trap than an opportunity. Prince Ilan was a distant figure, often absent from the court and uninterested in getting to know her. Their engagement had been a matter of politics, not love, and Liara had resigned herself to the idea that her happiness would be sacrificed for the greater good of her kingdom. But the princess couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to life than the constraints of royal duty. She had heard stories from traders and travelers who had visited distant planets, stories of other worlds filled with adventure, danger, and freedom. For the first time, she found herself longing for something more. She was curious about these faraway places and the people who lived there. She wanted to know what lay beyond the confines of her royal life. One evening, as Liara wandered through the palace gardens, lost in her thoughts, she overheard something that caught her attention. The courtiers were speaking in hushed tones about a new arrival, an emissary from Earth. The name of the planet was unfamiliar to Liara, but the whispers were enough to stir her curiosity. Earth was a distant, relatively unknown planet, far from the established centers of power. It was said to be inhabited by a primitive species, lacking the advanced technology and spacefaring capabilities of the more powerful civilizations. But there was something about the name that intrigued Liara. She had heard rumors of Earth's first contact with the galaxy, of humans making their presence known in the galactic community. The next day, Liara found herself at the Royal Hall, where Earth's emissary, Captain Jason Harland, would be making his formal introduction. The Grand Hall was filled with courtiers, each one eager to see the mysterious human who had traveled so far. As Liara entered, her eyes immediately locked onto the figure standing at the center of the room. Captain Harland was not what she had expected. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a rugged demeanor that stood in stark contrast to the polished nobility of the Voltorian court. His eyes, however, were the most striking feature. They were intense, filled with a quiet confidence that seemed to challenge anyone who dared to question him. Liara found herself drawn to him, though she quickly dismissed the thought. She was a princess, and he was just an emissary, a representative of a primitive planet. But there was something about the way he carried himself, something raw and unrefined, that made her feel both intrigued and uneasy. As the formalities began, Liara listened to Captain Harland speak of Earth's history and its journey into the galactic fold. He spoke with passion, describing the struggles of his people and the challenges they had overcome. It was clear that Earth's representatives were not the naive, unpolished beings that many had believed them to be. After the ceremony, Liara found herself lingering in the hall, unable to shake the feeling that something had shifted. She could hear the other courtiers gossiping, but her attention was focused entirely on Harland. As she approached him, her heart raced with a strange mixture of excitement and fear. She had never felt such an intense curiosity about someone before. Captain Harland turned toward her as she approached, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Princess Liara, I presume?" he asked, his voice smooth but with a hint of playfulness. Liara nodded, surprised that he knew her name. "You are the emissary from Earth?" she asked, trying to maintain her composure. Harlan chuckled. "I am. But I prefer to think of myself as something more practical. Earth isn't exactly known for its diplomats." Liara raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his frankness. "You're not like the other guests here," he shrugged. "I've never been one for formalities. But I'll try to make an exception for you, Princess." The conversation that followed was unlike any Liara had ever had in the palace. Harlan spoke freely of Earth's struggles, its limited resources, and the resilience of its people. He told her of the wars they had fought, the technologies they had developed, and the challenges they had faced. As she listened, Liara felt a deep admiration for this human. He wasn't a polished courtier or a politician. He was a survivor, a man shaped by the harsh realities of his world. As the evening wore on, Liara couldn't help but feel a pull toward him. There was something about the way he spoke, the fire in his eyes, that captivated her. She had spent her entire life surrounded by luxury and wealth, but it was clear to her now that Harlan's world was one of struggle and survival. And yet, he seemed at peace with it. She found herself wondering what it would be like to live in a world like his, where every day was a fight for survival, but also a chance to prove oneself. Before long, the banquet came to an end, and the courtiers began to depart. But Liara couldn't bring herself to leave just yet. She found herself standing by the balcony once more, gazing out over the city. She could hear the faint murmur of voices behind her, but they felt distant now. Her mind was elsewhere, focused on the human emissary who had come from a faraway planet to speak of his people's struggles. He had shown her a side of the galaxy that she had never known existed, and she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change. Liara's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see Captain Harlan standing there, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Harlan broke the silence. "You're different from the others," he said softly, his gaze steady. "You're not content with just the life that's been handed to you. I can see it in your eyes." Liara's heart skipped a beat. It was as if he could see right through her to the very core of who she was. I don't know what you mean." He smiled, a small, knowing smile. "You want more. You don't want to be a pawn in your father's game. I can tell." Liara swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "You're wrong," she said quickly, but the words felt hollow. She knew he was right. Deep down, she had always wanted something more than the life her father had planned for her. She just didn't know how to take the first step. Harlan's smile faded, and for a brief moment his eyes softened. "Maybe you don't have to follow the path that's been laid out for you," he said. "Maybe there's another way, but that's for you to decide." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Liara standing on the balcony, alone with her thoughts. She watched him go, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. For the first time in her life, Liara felt like she had a choice. The future was no longer something that was predetermined for her, it was something she could shape. As the stars began to twinkle above, Liara made a silent promise to herself. She would find out what lay beyond the walls of the palace, beyond the life her father had planned for her. And she would do it on her own terms. The following days were a blur for Princess Liara. She couldn't stop thinking about Captain Harlan. Every time she closed her eyes, his voice echoed in her mind. It wasn't just the things he had said, but the way he had said them. His confidence was unlike anything she had ever encountered, and it stirred something deep within her, something she had never acknowledged before. She found herself sneaking glances at the human emissary whenever he visited the palace. Their brief conversations had left her with a sense of longing that was hard to ignore. There was something about Harlan that intrigued her, something raw and real that contrasted sharply with the polished, controlled world of the court. He didn't hide his feelings or his thoughts, and there was a freedom in that, something Liara had always wished for but never dared to pursue. Despite her fascination with the human emissary, Liara remained caught in the web of royal duty. Every day, she sat through long, drawn-out discussions about alliances and politics, her mind often drifting far from the matter at hand. She could feel the walls closing in around her, the weight of her obligations pressing down on her. Her father, King Zorath, had been preparing her for a life of duty, marriage to Prince Ilan of Zorathia, a union that would strengthen the alliance between their two planets. The prospect of the marriage felt like a future she had no say in, a future where her desires and dreams would always come second to politics. The more she thought about it, the more suffocating it became. She had always known that her marriage was never meant to be about love, but something about the thought of it now made her restless. Prince Ilan was a distant figure, rarely present in the court, and when he did appear, it was only for brief, polite exchanges. She had never felt any real connection with him, and the idea of spending her life with someone she didn't even know felt like a cruel joke. One evening, Liara decided to seek out some solitude. She wandered through the palace gardens, her footsteps soft against the stone paths. The air was cool, and the scent of flowers filled the night. As she walked, her thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and frustration. The future her father had chosen for her seemed so distant, so unappealing. She longed for something more, something beyond the palace walls, beyond the role that had been assigned to her. It was during one of these moments of reflection that she once again found herself face to face with Captain Harland. He was standing by the fountain in the garden, his dark figure illuminated by the pale moonlight. He didn't notice her at first, and for a moment Liara simply watched him. There was something about him that seemed at odds with the royal surroundings. His presence, though commanding, felt natural, as if he belonged to the night rather than the polished halls of the palace. When he turned and saw her, his face broke into a smile. "Princess Liara," he said, his voice warm, "I thought I might find you here." Liara was surprised. "You were looking for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He shrugged casually. "Not exactly. But I've learned that when someone has a lot on their mind, they tend to come here for some peace." Liara couldn't help but smile at his words. It felt strange, talking so openly with him. "You're right," she admitted. "The palace is suffocating sometimes. I need to get away from it all to think." Harlan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I've been there," he said. "Sometimes the weight of duty and expectation can crush you, especially when it feels like your path has already been decided for you." Liara's heart skipped a beat. He understood what she was going through in a way no one else did. "It's not just the duty," she said, her voice soft. "It's the idea that I have no say in my own life, that my future is already set and I have no choice but to follow it." Harlan's expression softened. "I know that feeling. It's like being trapped in a cage, isn't it? But the thing about cages is that you can always find a way out if you're willing to take the risk." Liara looked at him, his words stirring something within her. "But what if the risk is too great? What if it's too dangerous to break free?" Harlan smiled, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "The greatest rewards often come from the greatest risks. If you stay where you are, you'll never know what else is out there. But if you take the leap, you just might find a life that's worth living." The princess felt a surge of emotion. For the first time in her life, someone was telling her that she had a choice, that she wasn't bound by the chains of her royal duty. It was a frightening thought, but also exhilarating. "You make it sound so easy," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's not easy," Harlan admitted. "Nothing worthwhile ever is, but sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that lead to the most freedom." For a long moment, they simply stood there in the silence of the garden, the only sound the soft rustling of the leaves in the breeze. Liara's heart raced. Harlan's words had awakened something inside her, something she couldn't ignore. The life she had always known, the life of royalty and duty, felt like a distant memory now. The idea of freedom, of choosing her own path, was too tempting to resist. "I've been thinking a lot about Earth," Liara said suddenly, breaking the silence. "What it must be like to live there, to have the freedom to make your own choices." Harlan smiled again, though it was softer this time. "It's not perfect by any means. Earth is a world of struggle, a world of survival. But it's also a world where people can carve their own destinies. It's not about being born into power, it's about what you do with what you have." Liara's thoughts were racing. The more she heard about Earth, the more she realized that it was a place where people had to fight for what they wanted. It was a place where freedom was earned, not given. And perhaps, for the first time in her life, Liara wanted that, wanted to earn her freedom. As they spoke, Liara's mind wandered to the life she had always known. The endless court rituals, the political games, the heavy expectations of her father. She had never questioned it before, but now, standing here with Captain Harland, everything felt different. She could see a world beyond the palace, beyond the duties she had been born into. A world where she could make her own choices, live her own life, and find her own way. But as much as she longed for that freedom, she knew it wouldn't be easy. Her father, King Zorath, would never approve. He had spent her entire life preparing her to be the perfect princess, to marry Prince Ilan and continue the family legacy. She couldn't just throw all that away. Or could she? Harlan's voice interrupted her thoughts. You don't have to decide anything tonight, Liara, but know that you have options. You're not trapped in this life. You can choose something else if that's what you want. His words settled in her chest, like a seed being planted in the soil of her heart. For the first time, Liara allowed herself to imagine a different future, one that didn't revolve around the palace, the royal court, or a marriage of political convenience. A future where she was free to follow her own desires, to choose her own path. It was a terrifying thought, but it was also a thrilling one. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what the future holds, but maybe there's a chance I can choose it." Harlan smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. "That's all anyone can do, choose the future they want to create." The princess nodded, her mind still swirling with possibilities. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she had some control over her own fate. The thought was both frightening and exhilarating, but one thing was clear. She couldn't go back to the life she had once known. Not now, not after everything she had learned from Harlan. As the evening drew to a close, Liara reluctantly said goodbye to the human emissary, but something had shifted within her. She walked back to the palace, her steps lighter than they had been in days. She didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time in her life, she knew that she had a choice. And that, in itself, was a revolution. Princess Liara sat in her private chambers, her fingers tracing the delicate edges of the intricate designs on the velvet cushions that adorned her bed. The palace was eerily quiet, as if it too could sense the heavy weight pressing down on her. Her thoughts were still tangled, restless, as she tried to process the whirlwind of emotions that had stirred inside her since that conversation with Captain Harlan. Every day she found herself drawn more and more to his words. The freedom, the struggles, the possibility of creating a life on her own terms. It was a temptation she had never truly considered before. The future her father had planned for her seemed distant now, as though it belonged to someone else. In her heart, she knew she was no longer the same person she had been before meeting Harlan. The walls of the palace felt colder now, as if they were closing in around her. She had always known that her marriage to Prince Ilan was never about love. It was a union built on politics, a marriage meant to secure peace between their two worlds. But it was more than just the lack of love that bothered her. It was the feeling of being trapped, of having no choice in the matter. Her life had been mapped out for her from the moment she was born, a series of carefully planned steps that led her toward the throne. Her father, King Zorath, had always spoken of duty, duty to the kingdom, to their people, to the galaxy. It was a duty that had always come first, even above her own desires, and for most of her life she had accepted it. But now the idea of giving up everything she had known, her identity, her purpose, her future, seemed unthinkable. Yet the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she couldn't continue living in this cage. Her thoughts kept returning to Harlan, to the way he had spoken of Earth, of his people's struggles and their resilience. He had shown her a life that was raw and real, a life where people fought for their place in the world, where choices mattered. Earth had no royalty, no preordained destiny, just people making their way one day at a time. And that was something Liara wanted. She wanted a life where she could make her own decisions, follow her own path, and find meaning beyond the walls of the palace. But such a choice was not without consequences. Her father's expectations weighed heavily on her, and she knew that her actions would have a ripple effect on the entire kingdom. If she refused to marry Prince Ilan, it could jeopardize the fragile peace between their worlds. King Zorath would never allow it. He had worked too hard to secure that alliance, and he had placed all his hopes on her to carry it through. The thought of disappointing him, of defying the very foundation of their kingdom, was unbearable. She had to be careful. Her actions could not be taken lightly. The princess had always known that her duty was to her people, but now she found herself questioning whether that duty also included sacrificing her own happiness, her own freedom. Liara's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Startled, she quickly rose to her feet, smoothing her gown. "Come in," she called, her voice steady, though her heart raced. The door opened, and her personal attendant, Elena, stepped inside. Elena was a familiar face, one Liara trusted more than anyone else in the palace. She had served the royal family for many years, and though she was a servant, she had always treated Liara with kindness and respect. "Princess, the king requests your presence in the council chamber," Elena said softly, her eyes filled with concern. "He insists it is urgent." Liara's stomach tightened. She knew what this meant. Her father's council meetings were never a simple matter. They were always filled with discussions of politics, alliances, and the fate of the kingdom. And now, it seemed, her father needed her to take part in one of those discussions. Perhaps it was about her upcoming marriage to Prince Ilan, or maybe it was about something else entirely. Either way, it was clear that she couldn't avoid her duties, no matter how much she wanted to. "I'll be there shortly," Liara replied, forcing a calm expression onto her face. "Thank you, Elena." The attendant bowed and left the room, leaving Liara standing alone, once again trapped between her duty and her desire for freedom. She glanced toward the window, the soft light of the setting sun casting long shadows across the palace grounds. Her father was a powerful man, but he was also old-fashioned, bound by tradition. He would never understand her need for freedom, for autonomy. He would never accept the idea that she might want something different than what had been planned for her. With a sigh, Liara left her chambers and made her way down the long, marble halls of the palace. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the empty corridors, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking toward something inevitable, something she couldn't escape. Her father's kingdom was built on order, on tradition, and on control. She had been raised to uphold those values, to maintain the balance of power in the galaxy. But now, she was faced with the realization that those same values were suffocating her, preventing her from becoming the person she longed to be. As she entered the council chamber, the air grew heavier. Her father sat at the head of the long, oval table, his sharp eyes trained on her as she approached. King Zorath was a formidable figure, his regal bearing making him seem even taller than he was. His long silver hair flowed down his back, and his dark eyes were filled with the wisdom of a lifetime spent ruling the galaxy. But there was something else in his gaze now, something that Liara couldn't quite place. He was clearly troubled, his brow furrowed as he turned to face her. "Sit, Liara," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "We have much to discuss." Liara took her seat, her heart pounding in her chest. The other members of the council were present as well, high-ranking officials, military leaders, and advisors, all of them watching her closely. She knew what was coming. "I trust you're aware of the situation with Earth," her father began, his voice cold. "Their emissary, Captain Harland, is a troubling presence in the palace. His influence on you is concerning." Liara felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks. She tried to keep her expression neutral, but her father's words struck a nerve. "Captain Harland is a representative of Earth, father," she said carefully, her voice steady. "He is here to ensure that our relationship with Earth remains strong." Zorath's eyes narrowed. "Yes, but his presence here is complicating matters. I've been informed that he has had private conversations with you. This is unacceptable, Liara. He is not one of our people. He has no place in our court." Liara clenched her fists in her lap. Her father's words stung more than she had expected. She had tried to maintain her distance from Harland, but it seemed that her father had already noticed something she had hoped to keep hidden. "I've spoken with him, yes," she said, her voice calm despite the storm swirling inside her. "But only in the course of his duties. He's here to represent his people, just as I am here to represent mine." Zorath's gaze softened for a moment, but it was quickly replaced with a stern expression. "You are not to speak with him again, Liara," he ordered. "This is not a matter of diplomacy. It is a matter of control. Earth's influence is growing, and I cannot allow their representatives to have any sway over you or our kingdom." The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket. Liara could feel the walls closing in once again. Her heart ached at the thought of defying her father, but she knew that if she obeyed him, she would be giving up the one chance she had to live her life on her own terms. "I understand, father," she said quietly, though the words tasted bitter on her tongue. But as she left the council chamber, a new determination grew within her. She couldn't let her father control her future any longer. She had to make a choice. And it was a choice that would change the course of her life forever. Princess Liara stood by the window in her chambers, gazing out at the starry sky that stretched endlessly above. The vast expanse of space seemed so distant, so cold, but it was also filled with possibilities. She had never felt so torn in her life. The decision she had made, The decision to step away from the life her father had planned for her was both exhilarating and terrifying. Her heart raced with uncertainty, yet deep down, she knew it was the only choice that truly mattered. The pressure from her father, King Zorath, had been overwhelming. Every day he had pushed her closer to the edge, reminding her of her duty to the kingdom and the importance of the alliance with Zorathia. He had made it clear that her marriage to Prince Ilan was not a matter of personal choice. It was a political necessity. But what if that life wasn't what she wanted? What if she could choose her own path, even if it meant breaking away from everything she had ever known? The thought of leaving Voltoria, of stepping out into the unknown, filled her with both fear and excitement. There was no going back now. Her future was no longer something that had been decided for her. It was something she could shape, something she could own. But the consequences of her actions were undeniable. She had already defied her father once by speaking with Captain Harland, and now she was preparing to defy him again in a much bigger way. It had been days since the council meeting. Liara had tried to focus on her duties, but every time she sat in the royal halls or attended the court functions, her thoughts kept drifting back to Earth, to the life she could never have. Harland's words echoed in her mind, "You have a choice." And for the first time in her life, Liara believed it. She could choose. A sudden knock at the door broke her reverie. "Come in," she called, turning toward the door. Elena, her personal attendant, entered with a concerned look on her face. "Princess, I've just received word that your father requests your presence in the royal gardens," Elena said, her voice quiet. "He says it's urgent." Liara's stomach tightened at the mention of her father. She knew what this meant. He had already begun to make plans for her marriage to Prince Ilan, and her refusal to obey his command was only making matters worse. She had no illusions now. Her father would never accept her choices. And yet the thought of remaining trapped in a life she didn't choose was unbearable. "I'll go," Liara said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. She had made up her mind. She was going to do it. She was going to take control of her own future. Elena gave her a worried glance but said nothing, simply bowing and leaving the room. Liara stood there for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She knew this meeting could be the turning point, the moment when everything changed. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her as she made her way toward the royal gardens. When Liara arrived, her father was already waiting. He stood beneath a large, flowering tree in the center of the garden, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. The moonlight cast a soft glow on his face, but his stern demeanor left no room for warmth. King Zorath was a man who valued order, control, and tradition above all else, and right now he was angry. "Liara," he said, his voice cold and formal, "you've defied me long enough." Liara's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had prepared for this moment, but hearing him speak them aloud made the reality of her actions feel all the more real. "I haven't defied you, father," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've made a choice. And it's my choice to make." Her father's eyes narrowed. "Your choice? You are a princess, Liara. Your choices are not yours alone to make. They are for the good of the kingdom. You cannot just abandon your duty for personal whims." "It's not just a whim," Liara said, her voice rising in frustration. "I can't spend my life doing what is expected of me if it means giving up everything that matters. I want more than just a political marriage, more than just living in a gilded cage. I want to live my life on my own terms." The king's expression hardened. "You are being foolish. You think you can just run away from your responsibilities. You think you can choose a life with a human emissary, a man who is nothing more than a representative of a primitive world. You are a princess, Liara. You were born to lead, not to run away from your destiny." "I'm not running away from anything," Liara shot back, her voice full of emotion. "I'm choosing my future, and I refuse to let anyone, not even you, decide it for me." Her father's face flushed with anger. "You will regret this, Liara. I will not allow you to bring shame upon this family, upon this kingdom." Liara's chest tightened, but she stood her ground. "I will not live my life in fear of your anger or your expectations. I want to be free. And if that means breaking away from the life you've planned for me, then I will do it." For a moment, the king said nothing. His gaze remained fixed on her, as if trying to read her thoughts, to understand the change that had come over her. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and heavy with authority. "If you choose this path, you will be alone, Liara. You will have no protection, no allies. Your future will be uncertain, and you will face challenges beyond anything you can imagine. And when it all falls apart, as it inevitably will, you will have no one but yourself to blame. Liara's heart ached at the thought of disappointing her father, but she knew that she couldn't live her life in fear of what might happen. She had already made her choice. "I accept that," she said softly, her voice steady. "I'm willing to face whatever comes next. I have to do this." The king's face twisted with frustration. "Then you are no longer my daughter," he spat, his words cold and final. "You are choosing a path of destruction, and I will not stand by and watch it happen. If you leave this kingdom, you will never be welcomed back. You are making a choice that will cost you everything." "I know," Liara replied, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "But it's my choice to make, and I won't go back on it." With that, she turned and walked away, the weight of her father's words hanging heavily in the air. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that she had to follow her own path. She had made her decision, and now she would face the consequences. Liara made her way to the palace docks, where the royal ships were docked. She had already sent word to Captain Harland, asking him to meet her there. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew that she couldn't stay here any longer. She couldn't live a life that wasn't hers to live. As she reached the dock, she saw Harland standing by one of the ships, his figure illuminated by the soft glow of the lights. He looked up as she approached, his expression softening when he saw her. "You're here," he said, his voice filled with quiet relief. "I'm ready," Liara said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "I've made my decision, I'm leaving." Harland stepped forward, his eyes filled with understanding. "I knew you would. You're stronger than you think, Liara." With that, he extended his hand, and Liara took it without hesitation. Together, they stepped onto the ship, leaving behind everything she had known. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Liara felt free.